Rico. I am the Environment for the Americas Mosaics and Science Program Manager. I know most of you, including some LHIP interns, most of the mosaics I've seen already, and it's wonderful to have you here today for this webinar. A lot of important information, as I've mentioned before, is going to be discussed today. So if you have any questions, jot them down. Thank you. Oh, and so I'll introduce. Many thanks to Mr. Ken Brody for joining us today to present the topic of workplace harassment. We hope you never encounter this, but if you do, we want you to understand how to handle it. Ken has been working for the National Park Service for 39 years, and he is the National Park Service Harassment Prevention and Response and Conflict Resolution Program Manager. Thanks, Ken, for being with us today. Could you open this up by sharing a bit of your history with the National Park Service? Were you ever an intern?
No, I wasn't an intern, but I started off actually as a volunteer in the parks right out of high school. From doing that, I became also a seasonal employee with the National Park Service. Back in the day, you could not become permanent unless you served some time as a seasonal. And sometimes seasonals would go on for 10, 15 years before they became permanent. I was fortunate to only have to be seasonal for about 8 years. But during that 8-year time period, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of different things. I worked in almost every program element of the National Park Service. As a seasonal, when I first came in, I worked in maintenance, did a little bit of law enforcement, admin work. In fact, I became a permanent employee taking the typist exam to come in as a clerk typist. That was the easiest way to become permanent. And I spent about 1.5 years doing administrative work. From there, I became a park ranger, supervisory park ranger, came up through the ranks, and I actually worked in the youth program office back when the National Park Service also had 4 Job Corps centers working with underprivileged and underserved communities. So I've been with the Park Service for 39 years. We also worked in law enforcement, the United States Park Police. I was a deputy chief before I left there, coming here to be a senior advisor. I also am responsible for our environmental justice program, looking at underserved communities as well. So I have a lot of background. This particular program is dear to my heart. I've had a lot of friends of mine, including my wife, who suffered sexual harassment within the federal government. So this is a very dear program to me. I take it very important. It's a very important program, not just from the standpoint of understanding your rights and responsibilities, but a lot of times people don't recognize sometimes the things that we say and the things that we do, how harmful it is to others. It could also expose the agency and your partner organizations to extreme liability from the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. So the purpose of my conversation with you today, and we're just going to have a conversation really, we're going to talk about what is discrimination, what is harassment, what does it mean? Because it means so many different things to so many different people. We come from different backgrounds, different cultures, and some things are just not acceptable. While in one particular part of the world, it might be acceptable, the things, how you talk to people. In many countries outside the United States, you don't even talk business until you talk about people's families. You get to know them. Unfortunately here, sometimes we forget about that human aspect of it, and we treat people a little bit differently. One of the things we'll talk about, no matter what you do in the National Park Service, any organization you work in, you have to be mindful of that. It's just not about your title or your duties and responsibilities. You have an element of responsibility to be civil to all those that you come in contact with, whether it's the janitor, whether it's the person who opened the door for you, whether it's the person that drops off the mail. A lot of times we have a lot of folks that come into different programs. One of the programs that I know we use in the federal government a lot is a handicap program, Lighthouse for the Blind, and other organizations like that. And sometimes people make fun of individuals. Well, someone might be an individual with a handicap, just because we constantly hear about people with handicaps. However, sometimes you're not aware a person's handicap. So you have to be very mindful. So as we go through today's conversation, in my 39 years, I've seen a lot of particular issues. I've been an investigator responsible for investigating discrimination claims as well as law enforcement issues. And you'll be amazed to find out how many times people are just not aware what they said or did offended someone. So we're going to talk about that, some way you can react to it. One of the most key things is to recognize what discrimination is. So if you experience it, we expect you to report it. And if someone says something or does something to you that you don't like and you're offended by it, make sure you tell them to stop. Make sure you explain to them that it's not appropriate, okay? So I'm looking forward to having a conversation. There'll be all kinds of opportunities for questions. And if you don't have anything else, we can go ahead and get started. So if I can get the first set of slides, all right. So when we're talking about understanding harassment, you need to understand those different types of behaviors. Every organization that you have has a set of rules. The National Park Service has a set of rules as it relates to deployment and civility called Director's Order 16. It's the anti-harassment program. And it follows on to the Department of the Interior's program, which is under Personnel Bulletin 1801, which is about being civil. Next slide. So the National Park Service has core values. And of those core values, we talk about respect, integrity, tradition, excellence, and shared stewardship. But what is really important is about respect. We need to embrace each other's differences. So the National Park Service primary mission is to preserve and protect for future generations, all people, all groups or organizations. The National Park Service has some of the most treasured places throughout history, not only just cultural landscapes and cultural resources, but as well as natural resources. And with everything that we talk about, it touches individuals. We're talking about integrity. In the National Park Service, we want to deal honestly and fairly with the public and one another. We come in contact with a lot of people from different countries coming to the National Park Service, no matter where you are, but you'll also come in contact with people from local communities. And talking about people from local communities, they might be different. They might be different from what you expect. And sometimes we all have perceptions. And we'll talk about perceptions and how that can cause us to have different unconscious biases and how we react to individuals a little bit later. The National Park Service is very proud on its traditions. We learn a lot, but we're now not bound by those traditions. And what I mean by that, for example, when you first talked about the National Park Service was predominantly white males as park rangers. If you look through history, you won't find too many female park rangers. There've been a lot of presidents that have been park rangers. But for the part that we're talking about now, we're trying to change. We clearly embrace diversity. That's one of the things that we look at, not only diversity, but equity. We also talk about excellence because we strive continually to learn and improve. If you've read the newspapers, if you've seen some of the things that have been said about the National Park Service, you know that in the Grand Canyon, we had some issues about harassment and discrimination, which led to us building out a very robust program to talk about that. In fact, anytime that a harassment complaint is filed, it comes across my email, and I'm required to make sure I look at those. In the past 3 years, we've been collecting this particular data. We've had about 1,000 cases in those 3-year period, and we continue to have cases come in, not quite at the pace that we first did, but looking at that excellence, we're always trying to strive to improve. Right now, about 52% of the cases that we receive are not even about harassment. Most of those are about inappropriate workplace conduct. But these inappropriate workplace conducts can lead to discrimination or forms of harassment. But those other 42% that we had were involving sexual harassment or harassment based on sex or one of the protected classes. So when we talk about a shared stewardship, we share a commitment to resource stewardship with the global preservation community. And part of that preservation also comes into play with underserved communities. Next slide. So the goals of the National Park Service Anti-Harassment Program, number one, we want to talk about clearly defining the responsibilities and expectations of those people that work with the National Park Service, whether you're an employee, a volunteer, an intern, a partner, or even our contractors. It covers all of our employees and non-federal employees, our supervisors and managers. We want to make sure that they understand their responsibilities, number one, to prevent harassment from continuing, number one, that's one of our main goals. But if it does happen, we want to make sure people are aware of how to handle that particular harassment. All of our managers are trained to act promptly when they receive allegations of harassment. We don't take harassment lightly. If you say something to an individual, one of our supervisors or managers about harassing behavior, they're required to enter a report. You might come to them and ask for it to be anonymous, and they can input that information anonymously. But at some point in time, during the course of that investigation, we'll have to talk to the individual to make the actual complaint. But we try to protect everyone's confidentiality throughout the entire process. The next goal is we hold individuals accountable for their actions. I talked about having 1,000 cases of harassment in the past 3 years. Of those 1,000 cases, only 136, when I say only 136, one is still too many. But of those 136 cases where there was a finding of harassment, the agency did take corrective actions, including discipline, removal, demotions, reassignments. So we take it very seriously. If there's a case finding of harassment, we do take a corrective action. So we encourage you, if you encounter that kind of harassment or behavior, please report it, let it go through the process so it can be investigated. And I assure you that I see every case that comes in. So if a case comes back with a finding of harassment but no corrective actions, it requires several levels of signature, including mine, in order for it to go through. Next slide, please. So what we're going to try to do is just watch a quick video from the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission about harassment. And then after that, we'll see if there's any questions.
Harassment. However, the significant number of complaints of harassment filed every year proves this is still a problem. In this short presentation, I'll explain to you how to recognize unlawful workplace harassment and what you, an employee, should do if you are a victim of harassment. Before I go further, let me clarify something. I will explain protections under the federal EEO laws enforced by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. These laws apply to all employers with 15 or more employees and all federal employees. However, your state may have anti-discrimination employment laws that include additional protections that also apply to you and others in your state. Let's show you a real-life scenario of harassment in the workplace. And like all the examples you'll see today, it's drawn from actual cases.
Oh, man, look at her. Right. You know what I would do to her. I'm gonna take a picture for later. Yeah, do that.
Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer.
Already took 2. Come on, man.
So let's start with the definition. Unlawful workplace harassment is unwelcome verbal or physical conduct that is based on one of the protected EEO bases that it alters the conditions of the victim's employment. This unwelcome harassment can change the conditions of employment in 2 ways. Number 1, by being so objectively offensive, intimidating, hostile, or abusive that it effectively changes the terms and conditions of the workplace. Or number 2, by culminating in an employment action such as termination or demotion. Here are examples that could be part of workplace harassment. A man touching a woman inappropriately.
What do you think you're doing?
Relax, this one little piece.
You're disgusting.
Come on, sweetheart, I'm just kidding.
Anti-Islamic cartoons sent to coworkers by email. Racial slurs painted on a wall or victim's car. And derogatory comments made about an employee's physical disability.
Please don't call me names. It's demeaning.
To help you understand the definition, let's discuss the phrases unwelcome conduct, protected EEO bases, and alter the conditions of the victim's employment. Unwelcome conduct is conduct that you did not initiate and you find undesirable or offensive. For example, the reactions of the woman in the break room vignette showed that she was offended by the behavior of the men. Unwelcomeness depends on how it is received. Some employees, however, enjoy engaging in harmless sexual banter, dating, or even exchanging sexual jokes at work. This conduct may not be unwelcome if it is okay with everyone involved. Another example might be two coworkers who like to debate religion while on their breaks. Again, this may not be unwelcome if it's okay with both employees. Nonetheless, your employer is responsible for everyone's work environment. So, even if the two coworkers are having a private conversation and both are fine with the topic, that doesn't mean everyone else is okay with it. If you are offended by the sexual banter or religious discussions you overhear from your coworkers, their actions could be creating a hostile work environment for you. However, if you decide to join in, you can't later complain about being harassed because your actions indicated that you did not find your coworkers' conduct unwelcome. I also want to discuss how to communicate unwelcomeness. Merely saying something like, "I don't like that joke," may be enough. You can also communicate unwelcomeness by letting your supervisor know or by going to the person identified in your employer's anti-harassment policy. When most people hear the word harassment, they think of sexual harassment. The men's behavior in the break room vignette might be the beginning of sexual harassment that eventually creates a hostile work environment. Sex is one of the protected EEO bases. So for now, let's just focus on sex harassment. Conduct does not have to be sexual to be based on sex. Sometimes it's about gender. For example, a woman who refers to all of her male employees as cavemen or repeatedly tells them how men are inferior to women may be harassing them, but not in a sexual way. Jokes emailed around the office about women being unable to read a map or unable to properly park cars would be based on gender, but are not sexual in nature. Or when employees bully a coworker and call her names because she is transgender. This may be harassment based on gender, even though it is not sexual. So harassment based on sex includes both harassment that is sexual and harassment that is non-sexual and based on gender. Did you also know that both the victim and the harasser can be either a woman or a man, and the victim and harasser can be the same sex? Yes, men can harass women or men, and women can harass men or women. This goes for both sexual and gender-based harassment. But remember, harassment can be based on any of the protected bases. You should not ridicule, irritate, or mistreat another person because of his or her sex or gender, race, color, religion, national origin, age, 40 or older, genetic information, or disability. So what is considered the workplace? The workplace is essentially wherever you are working, not just the physical space where you work. For example, while on a business trip, a company's attorney makes sexual innuendos about her male assistant, quote, taking care of her needs, and refers to him as her boy toy. He is embarrassed and offended by these comments and references. So this could be workplace harassment, even though this is happening outside of their actual work site. Your workplace can extend to anywhere you might travel for work, for a conference or trade fair, or even at a local restaurant where an employee's retirement celebration is held. And absolutely anyone who has access to your workplace can be considered a harasser. This means your supervisor, a supervisor from another area, a coworker, or even non-employees like the guy who repairs the copier, the woman who delivers the mail, or one of the folks who clean your office windows could be a harasser. We've covered the first part of our definition. What is unwelcome conduct? And we've talked about the protected EEO bases. Now let's talk about the third phase in our definition, alter the conditions of the victim's employment. A hostile work environment is created if there are comments or conduct that is unwelcome and so severe or pervasive that it creates an intimidating or abusive environment for you or others. So what is meant by severe or pervasive? First, let's look at conduct that is severe. Conduct that is severe is so serious or harmful that it may only need to happen once to create a hostile work environment. Physical touching escalates the severity of any given situation. Other examples of severe conduct include highly charged words and symbols in the workplace, like a hangman's noose or a swastika painted on the wall, or use of the N-word. In general, the more severe the conduct, the less pervasive it needs to be to create a hostile work environment. So what do we mean by conduct that is pervasive? Pervasive means the conduct occurs on a regular basis. That's why some harassment, such as jokes, may not be initially considered severe, but when it occurs over and over again, it can become more than just inappropriate. It can be considered pervasive. The conduct by the man in the break room vignette occurred once. However, if the man in the opening vignette often made sexually suggestive gestures towards their coworker when they saw her or passed her in the hallway, then the frequency of their conduct could create a hostile work environment for her. Occasional teasing, offhand comments, or isolated incidents that are not serious may not be considered unlawful harassment. But the more often this type of behavior occurs, the less severe it needs to be to create a hostile work environment. Harassment can come in different forms. You've probably heard of the term hostile work environment, but have you heard of the term tangible employment action? Anyone with access to your workplace can create a hostile work environment. A supervisor, a coworker, or a non-employee, but only a supervisor or someone with supervisory authority can make significant changes in the conditions of your employment. In other words, when unwelcome conduct results in a tangible employment action, such as denial of overtime, discipline, promotion, or termination, the harasser can only be someone with this kind of authority. For example, if your supervisor is pressuring you for dates or for sex and you keep saying no, he may be creating a hostile work environment for you. If your supervisor then punishes you for saying no by taking away your office space or denying you training, then he has taken a tangible employment action against you. And remember, it doesn't matter whether your supervisor is a man or a woman. Either way, no employee should have to put up with harassment or be punished for speaking up about it. So what are your responsibilities as an employee when it comes to unlawful workplace harassment? First, do you know if your employer has an anti-harassment policy? Most employers do. Find yours and read it. Secondly, you should avoid engaging in inappropriate behavior. What is inappropriate behavior? To start with, offensive conduct that is based on race, sex, color, religion, national origin, age, or disability is inappropriate. So, for example, when you start to make a joke about someone's age or forward one of those emails that talks about a woman in a derogatory manner, stop yourself. Next, if you believe you are a victim of harassment or witness harassment and have supervisory responsibility, take a look at your employer's policy and follow it. Typically, your first step to getting help is to alert an appropriate official. If you don't have any idea where to start, or you're just not sure or have questions, talk to someone in your HR or EEO office. Once alerted, it is then your employer's responsibility to take steps to investigate and stop harassment. Finally, commit to attending and participating in all training sessions provided by your employer regarding workplace harassment. It is your responsibility to stay informed. In this presentation, we've covered a massive amount of information in a short time. We defined unlawful employment harassment, talked about the basis covered by the EEO laws and how the workplace extends to wherever you are working, and discussed how harassment can affect the work environment or affect the conditions of employment for its victims. If you still have questions, we have lots of information about harassment on our website at www.eeoc.gov. That's eeoc.gov. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about workplace harassment, as working in an environment free of harassment is the right of every employee. Hello, and
So I know that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. Are there any questions so far? Okay, we can go to the next slide. So just some quick things you need to know. The National Park Service will not tolerate harassing conduct of a sexual or a non-sexual variety against anyone, against the National Park Service employee, our interns such as yourself in our programs, volunteers, contractors, or other people, including the public. Sometimes we have to deal with the public coming into areas, and we have to gauge their behavior as well. And we encourage you at that point in time, if something happens, to reach out to one of our local law enforcement folks, your program manager and supervisor, someone on scene to help you with that particular incident. People will be held accountable. That's something that we've learned that we have to do. The National Park Service constantly has to report to Congress about our activities as it relates to harassment and our harassment program and accountability and the actions that we take against individuals. Congress has been very much interested in the National Park Service, probably for about since the past 3 years when we had the incidents blowing up in various national parks. Bystanders are expected to report behavior. So again, in the presentation, it talked about that you could see something that's going on. We encourage you, if you see something, to say something, speak up, let someone know what occurred so we can document it. A lot of times, federal agencies are not aware that harassment is occurring because no one doesn't report it. If you don't report it, no one reports it. We can't take affirmative actions to stop that. We talked about pervasive and severe activities. One of the first defenses an agency has is that someone has reported it and we took immediate steps to stop it so it doesn't become pervasive. If it happens one time and we know about it, we can correct it, make sure we caution people, make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's really important. So if you see something, say something. You can report it to any National Park Service supervisor or manager or your program managers about that particular issues. We have a process that's called 16E. It's mostly for employees, but anytime there's a report, it has to go into the system. And our folks are trained about how to do that as well. Next slide, please.
Can I interrupt you with a question from one of the folks, Ken?
By all means, yes, please.
All right, Gabe, do you want to go on and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. So if we're in the workplace or not, like if we're just kind of anywhere that relates to our work and somebody's not willing to wear a mask or something and like it makes someone feel uncomfortable, does that fall under harassment or is that like its own thing?
No, it doesn't fall under harassment, but you can report that. We have a federal mandate whenever federal employees are working in programs in the National Park Service, they are required to wear that. So if you contacted a supervisor, let that supervisor handle that issue. But that's a very good question. Thanks.
And we have another question from Autumn.
Certainly, go ahead, Autumn.
Hi, so my question was, for example, if someone were to like file a complaint, whether it was like from harassment, sexual harassment, or anything of that nature, how long does it take for any action to be done in that case?
That's a very good question. And it depends on the severity of the issue. Normally our investigations have been averaging about 60 days. But we don't wait for the investigation to start. So within the first 3 days of someone reporting something, we take immediate action. For example, one of our first process, and we'll go into that a little bit later, but I'll address it here now as well. One of the processes is once you go to intake, it's sent to an employee relations specialist. It's also sent to myself and the supervisor and one of our attorneys in the Department of the Interior. We look at it, we evaluate it. Number one, our first issue is to make sure that the individual reporting it is safe, that there is nothing that's going to be a safety issue or security issue. If it is a safety or security issue, we also consult with our local law enforcement branch to deal with those particular issues, because sometimes harassment can actually be a crime, such as sexual assault, such as that matter. So if it's a criminal activity, we'll make sure that it's handled by law enforcement right away. Once it's been intaked, it's put into the system, it's assigned to an investigator, and then within a matter of 10 days, we start the actual investigation. EEOC requires us to start investigations for harassment cases and allegations within 10 days. So that investigator might be someone internally to the agency. We have a list of people that we go to that are trained employee relations specialists. We also have 2 senior investigators within the National Park Service, one that handles the East Coast and West Coast, that coordinates that. And then we have federal contractors that we go to as well. And the department has a process for us to just get an investigator real quickly. So usually within a short period of time. If it's a long protracted process, the longest has been 57 days. And from there, they're usually resolved within the 10, 15 days. Does that answer your question? And again,
Yes,
we'll talk
sir.
about the process. Yeah, we'll talk about that process.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Surely, surely. So NPS expects behaviors and conduct. We want you to treat everyone with dignity and respect and kindness. So we suggest that you listen to others' views before expressing yourself. It's always better to seek understanding before being understood. Don't belittle, judge, or patronize folks. Refrain from demeaning or discriminatory or harassing conduct, behavior, or speech. Honor the roles and responsibility of other people. They all have a duty and responsibility. They all place together your job, their job, getting the organizations and the National Park Service mission accomplished. Think before you speak. Too often we can respond in anger, and sometimes the things that come out of our mouth, we wish we would come back and be able to take it back. Unfortunately, there's not a button that says rewind. So that once it's said and it's out there, it causes damage and harm. Every day, focus on your work and be able to perform the mission and vision of the National Park Service office you're working with or assigned to. And above all, take personal responsibilities for your professional conduct and behavior. You can make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake. If it's a mistake, let's learn from it. It's also important that you understand the federal rules and regulations, especially as it relates to harassment, okay? Really, really important kinds of issues. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some examples of unacceptable conduct. Again, physical, verbal, or nonverbal conduct that's harassing, teasing other people. A lot of times you hear people talk about good-natured teasing. In my 39 years with the National Park Service, I've never seen any good-natured teasing that didn't cause a problem. Teasing, treating people differently, talking about things that they might have shortcomings, the way they speak, the way they look. You just have to be mindful of those kinds of things because they can. Some folks are huggers. Some folks will ask you, do you mind if I hug you? If you don't want to be hugged, please tell them, I prefer not to be touched. I prefer not to be hugged. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we encourage you to speak up if something occurs that you're not comfortable with. Staring at someone, making sexual gestures or innuendos, very much inappropriate. Referring to people using inappropriate expressions and slang such as sexy, babe, boo, cutie, hottie, sweetie, darling, all those can be offensive, okay? So be mindful of that. Anytime you're displaying sexual images, either print or digitally, that's a problem. One thing I didn't really talk about is we talked about being in the workplace. There's another part of the workplace right now because of the pandemic, and that's called remote working. So if you're working from your home, you're still bound by these same rules and regulations. In fact, we've seen an uptick in harassment kinds of allegations as a result of people attending conferences online, team meetings, webinars, and emails. So it's really important that you understand that your emails and working remotely still applies to the agency's particular program. Next. So we talk about unconscious bias a little bit. We all have unconscious biases. We all do. We make assumptions and judgments and stereotypes about people and situations. You see someone, you might have a particular stereotype or a particular prejudice or particular unconscious biases based on things that you experienced. We've seen a lot of that in the news lately with Asian Americans and Pacific Islands, folks being treated differently because people have made remarks about where a particular COVID-19 virus originated. It's on the uptick. It's still very important that you don't react on those particular biases. One of the first things you can do is understand what your bias is so you can make corrections, get some training about that to deal with that. You treat everyone equally. Treat people the same, no matter their race, religion, gender, size, age, how they dress, their country of origin, or even their name. Some people make offenses based on people's names. They make assumptions based on those particular names. People have a tendency to discriminate against groups or types of people unintentionally based on exposure to negative stereotypes or other experiences that they may have. And one of the things I always talk about, if you watch just kids play with anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. They don't say that person is Black, that person is Asian. They talk about their friend down the street. They talk about their friend. It's not about that. So discrimination is a learned behavior. So be mindful of that. Discrimination of any type is not only wrong, it's also illegal. Next slide. So this is various types of unconscious biases: perception, the halo effect, the attraction effect, and similarity effect. Perception, you have a perception about a group of people, whether it's true or not. You tend to treat those people differently, or maybe even speak to those people differently. Prime example is how some people look down on blue collar workers. In the National Park Service, a visitor is more likely to see a blue collar, one of our maintenance workers, than sometimes a park ranger or an intern or a scientist, okay? Talking about the halo effect. You see one good thing, something that you like about that individual. Maybe they went to the same school that you went to. Maybe they're in the same major. So you tend to look over the things that they may say, or even because of that halo effect, because they're a family member, they may say some things that are just downright bad, but you overlook them time and time again. Sometimes you hear people say he's a good guy, except when he's not taking his medication. He's a good guy if he just doesn't drink. We need to treat people the same, whether or not they're doing what we want them to do. We need to focus on our jobs, focus on the mission, focus on the things that we were hired to do, things that we're trained to do. And when we see things that are not right, report them. Next slide. Again, harassment has no place in the National Park Service. We are committed to providing a safe and respectful work environment for all of our employees, volunteers, and interns. We will do whatever it takes to protect you while you're with us. And we ask you just to let us know if things aren't going well for you, to report, because if you report it, we know about it, we will take an action. Next slide. So we talk about what is workplace harassment. So there's two different definitions. The definition that you heard about in the video about equal opportunity employment. It talks about offensive comments, conduct, or discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, including sexual harassment, pregnancy, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, and age. The federal regulation about age is 40 years or over. And that's important to understand the difference. Next slide. In the National Park Service, however, we look at things a little bit differently. For example, in the National Park Service, it doesn't matter what age you are. We feel that if you're discriminated against, whether you're 20 or 25 years old, because of that discrimination, we want you to report it and we will take an action against that. There's been some talk about changing to be more in line with the national EEO law about 40 years or older, but we haven't done that yet. So this is currently the information. But we define it as unwelcome conduct, verbal or physical, including intimidation, ridicule, insults, comments, physical conduct that is based on an individual's protected status when the behavior reasonably impacts a person's job. And by that means, we're saying if someone's holding your job over top of your head, if you don't go out with them on a date, or they treat you differently because you're African-American, or you're Muslim, or you're Asian, or whatever the protected class is, that's a form of discrimination. Next slide, please. So protected status or class, or characteristics as it may be. The term protected class or status refers to the groups protected from employment discrimination under Title VII of the EEO regulations. And we talked about that: race, color, religion, sex. And we talked about sex. That doesn't always have to be sexual, okay? And also it could be male on male, female on female. So it's very important to understand what those particular are. We also talk about disability discrimination, whether it's physical or mental. It's important to understand that those are very important. We've seen a lot of issues within society as it relates to people with mental health being treated differently, basically because of their disability. Next slide. So protected area is another thing when you talk about. So we talk about protected activity. We're talking about if you filed a complaint and someone starts to treat you differently because you filed a complaint, they're treating you more harshly. They're harassing you. They're telling you you're going to lose your job because we found out you filed a complaint, or encouraging you not to file a complaint or not to speak up or to participate in the investigation. That's a protected activity, and that could be talked about as it relates to retaliation. Next slide. So we talk about retaliation. Some examples of protected activity or retaliation is reporting harassing conduct or discrimination, filing a claim, or providing evidence, or even being a witness for someone else who's filed a case. If someone reacts negatively to you about those issues, that's part of retaliation, okay? We've had, in the past 3 years, we've had 97 retaliation claims filed against individuals. We take it very seriously. In fact, the Equal Opportunity Commission has just asked us to put out some additional information about what retaliation is. So I'm in the process of developing some training right about retaliation. And the director of the National Park Service will be shortly putting out a memorandum announcing zero tolerance for retaliation, because some people believe that it's okay to retaliate. And one of the biggest drawbacks of people reporting harassment and discrimination is the fear that someone will retaliate against them. But here in the National Park Service, we will not tolerate retaliation, even as a first offense, especially from supervisors. Next slide, please. So email communications. Be mindful, in the world of today, we use a lot of communications. We use a lot of chats, and we use a lot of emails. Just for an example, Chevron Corporation paid $2.2 million to 4 female employees and settled a lawsuit based on jokes that were shared with them over email. And 2 African Americans in Morgan Stanley filed a $60 million lawsuit because of discrimination via email. Remember, emails, official emails, talking about work or official purposes, and they're never deleted. Even if you delete them, they still stay within that particular system and can be recalled and used in cases. They are not deleted. You can delete, empty your trash bin. They're still on the record on the agency server. Next slide, please. We talk about disagreeing. It's okay to disagree. We actually maintain decorum and civility. Never yell, raise your voice. Focus on issues, not on people. You try to use an I statement, not a you statement. You know, someone does something, you can say, I feel this way when you did that. I could feel this way when it was done. One of the biggest concerns or complaints I've seen people make is when people say, I'm getting sick and tired of you people. That's an act of discrimination. So be mindful of that. Know when to agree, know when to take a break, know when to move on, and know when to ask for additional help for somebody else to intercede on your behalf. Next slide. So what do you do if you experience or witness harassment? One of the things we ask you to do is to, number one, talk to the person and tell them that behavior is not wanted and that requested to stop. And we ask you also to report it to a supervisor or the person harassing you, any NPS supervisor or manager, any one of our employee relations specialists in the Human Resource Office, or any of the National Park Service sponsored organizations. That's really important to them as well. If you report it to them, we will just ask that they report it to us so we can take an action. We don't want people to think that just because you report a case, nothing's going to happen. That's one thing that we try to harp on with everyone, is that if you see something, say something, we do take action. And also the National Park Service Youth Program Office. Next slide, thanks. So when allegations are received, they enter into a complete tracking system. Immediate evaluations made to determine about safety and security issues, determine if a crime has been committed, such as stalking, sexual abuse, sexual assault, or rape. Coordination with the Department of the Interior's attorneys, as well as using investigations for corrective actions. Next slide. So this is the process map that we use for investigation and looking at reports. Autumn, this is what you were talking about earlier. So as you can see, when it comes in, the first is to immediately evaluate whether there's a security or safety risk. Then it's an intake. That should take no more than 1 day. Once it's in the intake system, we make a preliminary decision whether it's going to be investigated through an investigator, what type of investigator, in-house, out-house, or an inquiry. Within 3 days, we take an action. And that action is to determine whether or not we're going to investigation or can we jump right to resolution. And the investigations are supposed to take place and start off within 2 days. Sometimes that means we have to write a contract, we have to do a task order, or we have to get an investigator assigned to that particular location if we have to fly them in or do it verbally. Next slide. We have a wide range of support options. We have a conflict resolution program. I had that program as well. We have an employee assistance program, equal opportunity program, equal opportunity employment offices. No matter where you work in the National Park Service, there's an EEO office attached. We also have employee resource groups that are there to help look at particular issues when they hear things. The Department of the Interior also has an Office of the Inspector General that looks at waste, fraud, and abuse, as well as cases of harassment by senior officials. And then we also have an ombudsman that's an independent evaluator that comes in and gives people options about which way to go. Next slide. So some quick reviews and takeaways. Civil treatment is always required. Always treat everyone with dignity and respect. Be mindful of any unconscious biases that you may have and adjust appropriately. Learn how to disagree respectfully. Never yell or raise your voice during disagreements. Again, take responsibility for your own actions. Report inappropriate and harassment and know how to report that. Next slide. So National Park Service Equal Opportunity Employment contacts. This is the address, the street information, and the telephone number of our EEO office and the Washington office here at headquarters where I sit. But we also have regional offices throughout the United States. If you feel that you've been discriminated against, you have 45 days to file a complaint in that process. But we look at other processes through our anti-harassment process anytime. So even at the end of the summer, if you find that it's something you want to report, we'll still take that and look at it and investigate it. Next slide. And these are all the EEO offices within the National Park Service, and I'll ask Ernestine White at some point in time to make sure you guys get a copy of this, so you'll have it in case you have any issues. Next slide. I think that's about it. I was right. Any questions?
Yes, we'll open it up for questions from everybody now. I know that I don't have the Zoom ones in front of me. I have the chat ones in, the ones in the chat, but I don't know if anybody's raising their hands. If you guys in Boulder can tell me about any questions that you've seen.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
I have a question. So if an intern experiences any harassment towards like the very end of their internship, are they still like encouraged to submit a report even though they may not be necessarily involved?
Yes, we will still investigate it, please.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want it to occur for someone else. Or if you're coming back, we don't want you to be faced with that. So we still want to resolve that particular issue. Good question.
Autumn?
I actually had one more question. It was from the one that I stated previously. So once somebody went ahead and you guys, it's like you said, it takes like 10 days for it to, get through. What will happen to the employee that made that claim? Like, will they be pulled out from work? Will they still be working the internship or?
Usually if we have a problem with someone, we will move that individual that the intern is harassing, we'll reassign the supervision. We don't try not to take an action against the individual who complains about a particular situation. If you came to us and said you wanted to be moved, we would entertain that, but we would just not automatically move you. We should not do that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Any other questions? I know it's a lot of information, and if you don't have any questions right now, if you think of them, you can always have them sent to Ms. Ernestine White, and she'll get them to me, and I can also respond back. So I know it's a lot to digest.
I just wanted to make the comment, Ken, that from the partner organizations of the National Park Service, if you feel like you're experiencing anything, we want to know sooner than later Don't wait to decide, yeah, this is getting really bad. Just, we want to hear as soon as possible.
That's why we have the group chat, the confidence to talk to us, Dahlia with LHIP, Griselda, Chanel, Susan. You can come to us. We sometimes hear some things in the workshop in August and we kind of go, what? You should have come to us sooner with that, because it's not right. You shouldn't have been subjected to a comment like that. And we tend to be permissive of these things. We just tend to let them pass and go. But like Ken was saying, please don't let it happen to anybody else. Just speak up. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Brody, for the talk today, the presentation, very informative, and to opening up the door for us to be able to come to you, to your office, to give any information that we need to give you for investigations. We appreciate your time and we appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.